The 1990s had a bunch of activity on digital currencies. One of the big ones was a thing called e-gold, which was kind of my introduction to digital currency, and that was account based. So big server, database, gold vault, account based, but no KYC, AML, CTF. So they ran an anonymous payment rail in the late 90s, gold backed, and you could physically pull gold coins out of that system. And I ran on about that for about a year, told my employers at the time, hey, digital currency is the way of the future. You guys need to get on top of this digital currency thing, that system. On top of that, then comes Ian Grigg's DigiGold system, which uses that first eGold system as the reserve for the system, right? Got public wallet, public balance. You can see how much gold is in the reserve. And then from that, they issued cryptographically secured digital tokens, each one of which gave you a legal claim on 1 gram of gold. This is the system that we built Mattereum to kind of imitate and emulate with Ian Grigg's help, to try and generalize that for all asset classes in an environment that had smart contracts. As for the sort of long-term picture for things like gold, at the point where you've got robots and AI coming on seriously, there's an enormous amount of recoverable gold that is not recoverable for humans, but gets really, really, really very recoverable when you put robots into the mix. You think of things like deep sea mining, all that nodules of metal down there. You can't really environmentally get that stuff with industrial style machinery, but you could very easily get that with a bunch of robot arms on a digger. So, the gold supply is not nearly as static as people think once you put robots into the mix and AI. At the same time, you kind of have people saying, like, well, gold or Bitcoin, which one do you think is going to be the asset of the future? I think the asset of the future is the same as it's always been. I think it's land and particularly real estate, simply because gold is only, 30 trillion for all the gold in the world right now? So if you imagine, the huge amounts of value going into gold out of fiat, gold is 5,000. Why would it stop at 5,000? Go to 50,000, then a Big Mac costs you $820. That kind of scenario where you get hyperinflation is how you get these huge numbers for gold and for Bitcoin. In that environment, you're talking about all the people that are currently holding gold, 5x, 10xing, 20xing their money. I don't think the social stability is there in that scenario. I think it's just too much of a redistribution of wealth and society tiers. Same thing with hyper-Bitcoinization. If Bitcoin goes up from being 1% of the M2 supply to being like 40% of the M2 supply, in that process, okay, Bitcoin is now the de facto money for an entire world, but in the process, what you've done is you've basically moved staggering amounts of wealth into the pockets of the Bitcoiners that prior to that was in somebody else's pockets. Again, I don't think the social stability will hold it. But real estate, if you use real estate as the backing for currency, or you just make real estate directly tradable, in that kind of scenario, the global distribution of real estate is pretty close to the current global distribution of wealth. So I can imagine a system where we move to a real estate backed system, and there's something between 75 and $100 trillion of real estate in America alone. US national debt is, did I see 37 trillion? So, there is enough wealth in the buildings and the land distributed close to the distribution of wealth overall in the society that I think that real estate is kind of the dark horse here. If you needed to rebase the global financial system because the dollar went to zero, there's a role for Bitcoin, there's a role for gold, but I think the only thing that gives you the possibility of rolling into a new system and not having like violent revolutionary transformation on every front, like tanks on the lawn kind of violent, I think it has to be real estate, simply because real estate is big enough to be stable and has a wealth distribution that people already can live with.